So he would preach here a lot more than he does, but he is a pastor of a church in Liberty, Texas, called Grace Church Liberty. It's doing a great work in Liberty, and that's not that far from us. What is it, an hour and a half from here? I don't know, something like that.
55 minutes.
55 minutes.
Yes.
Don't say that too loud, because if they like you, they may
Close
drive
enough
over
for
there.
everybody to be there Sunday.
Yeah. So, but just incredible guy, and the people that I like to have friendships with and do life with are real. And this guy is that. He's real. He has 2 daughters, Blair and Bryn. Both of them are beautiful girls that are in college, and just sweethearts. His wife, Kim, who's a dear friend of ours, also was not able to be here tonight, but just wonderful people. But let me tell you a little bit about Clint and I. We go way on back there. We went to Bible college together. He called me before he came to Bible college. Said, "You going?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, man, I'm going to be there too." And boy, we were so spiritual.
Yes.
We were so spiritual. And about 18 years old, fresh out of high school. But then we were just, I don't know when this started happening. Clint, you may know a little bit better, but somewhere around our second, third year in school, we started traveling together in the summers, and we did that a lot. And when I tell you a lot, we traveled continuously all over doing something we called tag team preaching. Now, I know that sounds a little funny, but it literally was tag team preaching. I mean, like, it was like tag team wrestling, and I would be preaching. I'd preach a certain part of the message, and then he would tag me, and he'd start preaching that message. And then I'd tag him back, and I'd pick up right where he left off. And we did this so much, and we had so much fun. It was such a good time, right?
Yes.
And we learned so much about one another and growing together in our young ministries, and so it just bonded us for life and friendship, and we are still that. It's a lifelong friendship, and I love that so much. So I want to ask him some questions tonight. Hopefully, trying to ask these folks questions that would minister to really everybody. But this is a question here that I want you to know about, and that is, Pastor Clint, when did you...
First, let me say, we should have stood up because I look skinnier standing up
Oh, you
than I
do?
sitting down.
Oh, well, so you sit down, it kind of settles in on...
Shoves everything down.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, but
I should have done
We'll
that.
get through it.
We should have, like on bar stools that
Yes.
kind of stretch. Okay. So when did you first feel your call to ministry? Like, when did you first feel that tug?
It was after I graduated from high school. That summer after that, I didn't want to be in the ministry. That was like a lifelong determination that I was not going to be a pastor or a minister. And in fact, I was registered at Lamar University to go study accounting, and that was going to be my dream, to be an accountant. But then after I graduated there from Buena High School, it was probably about a month after graduating that I shocked my parents one day when I went to them and said, I think I'm feeling my call to the ministry, and I think I want to go to Bible college. And I thought they would rejoice, but instead they kind of looked at me with a puzzled look because I couldn't even testify growing up. You know,
Really?
We had testimony services back then. Everybody remember testimony services? You know? I'm glad those went away. But I mean, I wasn't good at talking in front of people, and so literally my parents weren't against it, but they weren't really for that. They asked me to really think about that and make sure that's what I wanted to do. And then I went to a friend of mine that had been preaching since his junior year of high school, a guy named Paul Jacks, and he was the second person that I went to, and I said, "Man, how did you know that you were called into the ministry? Because I think I'm feeling that, and I really didn't want that, didn't expect that, you know." And so I continued on, and we ended up going to Bible college. And then you and I came back and preached our first sermon together in Buna.
Yeah, so he was raised in Buna, just right up the
Yes.
road. So
Yeah, so right up the road at Buna, it was on a youth rally night, or not even a youth rally, it was a youth service night. And we thought we were going to bring the house down, and we got through, and everybody's just sitting there staring at us. It wasn't good.
it wasn't good.
Neither one of us.
Neither one of us.
My parents actually were there. They snuck in the back, and after my first sermon, they told me later that they really began to question God. They prayed, and I'm glad they didn't tell all of that then.
Yeah.
But they really, after my first sermon, they're like, God, we just don't know if this is Clint. We really want you to show us a sign, you know?
Yeah.
And I preached my second message in Natchez, Louisiana, and it was about as bad as the first one.
Yeah.
They just weren't there to hear that one.
Yeah.
But my third message was on a Sunday night. That's when we had Sunday night, and that was the only service that God could really move in back in that day. It was on a Sunday night. And God, my parents asked God, said, we want you to show us a sign that you really called Clint to preach. That night, the place was blowing up when I was preaching. I was saying stuff I didn't even know.
Oh, yeah.
My Aunt Sylvia ran the aisles while I was preaching. She doesn't run the aisles.
Somebody paid her off.
Yes. And my parents were sitting there crying. They were like sitting right here on the front row. I can still see them. And they're sitting there crying. And I'm like, hey, we finally got this thing rolling. What y'all crying about? Get up and rejoice with me. But later they told me, they said, we knew that was the sign from God that he had called you because you were the same Clint 2 sermons ago, but the anointing of God come down on you. And that made all the difference that night. And it was just an amazing night. And then from then on, the Lord just continued to pour out his, I still had some bad sermons, but overall the Lord continued to anoint, and it was just a confirmation to my parents and to me that God had called me. And then that's when I reached out to you and found out you were going to be at TBC, and wow, that's crazy stuff right there, you know.
I love that.
That first sermon, if you remember, I told everybody that my scriptures didn't go with my title, but if they'd give me some time, I'd figure it out. I like the title and I like the scriptures, and they didn't go together. It was crazy.
I hope those are not on any recording. Well, actually, I wish yours were on a recording. I hope mine are not.
Yes.
Well, I've watched you serve people for 35 plus years, and that's crazy that we're saying those kind of numbers because that means we've been preaching for a little while. But and I know your heart. I love your heart, Clint. You know that, and I love your heart. But I also know I've watched you serve in Sherman, Texas. I've watched you serve in other spots where you really devoted a lot of your ministry to, and I've watched you be misunderstood. And where do you feel you have been most misunderstood? And kind of flesh that out, because I think everybody in their life is sometimes trying to do good, but they're misunderstood. And I just want them to hear that come from you. So,
yeah. Today, when I was thinking about some of these questions, I kind of went with my first answer, what I thought I would say, instead of getting too deep into it.
Yeah.
And my first answer would be, if you change some of your beliefs on how you were raised, you're not a bad person.
Yeah. Yeah.
It may not be your right, it may be your wrong, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Because I was misunderstood by many. And over the last few years, I've shifted in some beliefs and things, and I've lost some really good friends over that, you know. And so I would say about being misunderstood, I'm sure there's a lot of people that misunderstood me, but they didn't tell me, although some people did. I had one guy in Sherman that misunderstood something that I said. I can't remember what it was, but he came to me and he said, "You're my 27th pastor, and I sure thought you would be different." And I said, "I'm probably need to be different, but if I'm your 27th, I think you're the problem."
Yeah.
So whatever you misunderstood, you've been doing that for a while.
There's a common denominator there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what, it's, when you shift, then you're going to be misunderstood in that area, and you're not going to be able to fix all of that. Mm-hmm. I tried to fix it for a little while, but I finally realized I couldn't fix that.
Yeah.
I just had to be misunderstood by some,
Yeah.
and I'm still misunderstood by some.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes there's not a person in Christianity that hasn't shifted as you grow. As you grow, yes. You change. You have fresh revelations in the Word of God, and if they're anchored in the Word of God, we got to stay there. But you change. You change. You're not the same person you were 30 years ago. You're not the same. I'm not saying you. I'm saying people in general.
Yes.
And so in that change, sometimes people feel like, well, because they're not the same person 30 years ago, they're bad.
Yes.
No, if you're still anchored in the Word of God, all's well,
Stay in the book.
Yeah, I've heard somebody say one time, well, I want to go back to where I used to be. I'm going, I don't want to go back to where I used to be. I've grown.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're going back to where you used to be, that means you're not growing where you're at. I've grown to this place. I don't want to go back. And that I want to stay anchored in the Word of God, but there's change in our life. Everyone has that. Yes. Everyone has it. It's a process. Mm-hmm. And so all of your people in the Bible did that, So yeah. I love that. Good stuff. I'm sure they've picked up, especially the ones that don't know you already, but God has given you the gift of humor. You're a funny man. You're a funny man. And sometimes you don't mean to be funny, and sometimes you do mean to be funny, but you're a funny man. And we sometimes at the office start talking about you, and we start laughing.
Yeah.
You're just a funny man. If you follow him on social media, you're not going to get political rants. You're going to get things that make you laugh. Yeah. And but how do you believe seeing the funny side of things helps you deal with life?
Humor has been natural with me. Some people try to work at humor, and then they look stupid.
Yeah.
And if you it's either flowing or it's not.
Yeah.
And I've tried to force it sometimes because people, certain times they introduce me as the humorous guy, and then I feel pressure.
Yeah. And
then I'm not humorous because I'm trying to be humorous.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's natural. It's helped me in a lot of areas in my life, but then it's also, I like that you put in this, you said the gift of humor. I remember a church that we used to do Christmas banquet comedy, and then after he started his own thing and I was doing my own thing, I still traveled doing Christmas banquet entertainment, making people laugh. And I remember this one church that we went to, and they had just lost their pastor. He had resigned. It was kind of a forced out deal, and a lot of the people were upset about that. And while I'm in there putting on my uniform for my comedy routine, Kim comes in there and says, "I just want to tell you, everybody's in there crying right now." Because they're all talking about losing their pastor. Because the former pastor had told me, he said, they still want you to come because we had you scheduled already. They don't want to cancel it. They want some entertainment. But she said, "I just tell you, they're all in there crying. I don't know what you're going to do." I'm like, I need a paycheck, and I'm going to go in there and make them laugh. I was an evangelist at Christmas time.
Evangelist Christmas time is starving evangelist.
If I didn't preach or do comedy, I didn't eat.
Yeah.
And so I said, we're going to make this bad boy go, And I went in there, and I just did. At first, it was really tense because everybody's sitting there crying, man. But I went in there, and I just started going through my comedy. And before long, those people that had been crying started laughing. And it turned out to be one of the best times of comedy that I ever had because it was a ministry that night. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, people come up to me and just hugging me, thanking me for all of that. And in fact, we were one place one time, and a lady come and kissed me on the cheek in front of Kim and said, "You're so funny." And Kim
Didn't think
wanted to
that was
punch
funny.
her.
Didn't think it was funny. Yeah.
But she was an older lady, so it wasn't like a big deal. But I don't like to tell that part of the story all the time. I just want to say some lady come kiss me after I did comedy. Sounds better than saying she was older.
Right.
But so that's what I just used that, and it's helped me in my own life. And you know what? I guess Kim and I have been married 30 years, and Kim has picked up on that ministry from me, and she makes me laugh so much. She's always saying things and doing things, and it's like she ministers to me. She makes me happy at certain times by her comedy, or her humor. Yeah. So it's just something that I use quite a bit, and now people that come to our church in Liberty or wherever, they enjoy that.
Yeah. Don't you think it kind of helps you not take yourself so seriously?
Yes.
I see, especially in the ministry, but I mean, people in general take themselves so seriously that sometimes you just need to lighten up and have fun, making fun of yourself and having a little fun with all that and not being so sensitive. And we live in such a sensitive world but they just, I think that helps too.
Yeah.
And I see that in all of us. So
I think there's been a lot of situations that I really needed that humor.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why God gave it to me.
Yeah.
Need to make myself laugh sometimes.
So, I don't know, well, he mentioned something a while ago that I don't know if you caught, but we used to do banquets together, comedy at banquets. And that was, I just wish y'all could see it, other than I don't want to do it, but I wish y'all could see it, because we had some fun, didn't we?
Yes.
Man, that was fun times.
We did a lot of banquets.
Yeah, we did a lot of Christmas banquets. So, but a lot of you may not know this, but Clint went through cancer. And I want to ask him some questions about that, because it was traumatic on him and his wife and me as a friend, everybody around him. But when you walked through cancer, how did that change your life view? What give us that a little bit.
One thing is I never thought I would have cancer. I mean, nobody thinks that, but it's just like, not me, So one thing is that it changed me to realize that we're all vulnerable. And then the hardest question I had to answer through all of that is when my two daughters, which that was in 2012, so it's been 10 years ago, and my daughters were 15 and 12 then, and they were used to hearing the word cancer relating to people dying, and they both looked at me and said, "Daddy, are you going to die?" And that's when it hit me that I could, it could happen. And so it made me value every day more, And then Adina actually put me in contact with a lady from this area that had went through the same type of surgery and same treatments. And we connected, and she walked me through everything that was going to happen during all this. And I, she was through it. She was looking like life was great for her. And then she got cancer in her back. Both of our tumors were on our jaw right here. And then she got a tumor on her back. And she didn't survive that tumor. And I thought, well, at least I don't have a tumor on my back. Well, my next visit to MD Anderson after that, and I can still see myself sitting in the recliner when I heard the news that she had passed. And it was a tough evening in our house. But I went to MD Anderson the next visit, and they said, today we're going to do a x-ray of your back, because a lot of people that have a tumor here, they end up having a tumor on their back. Well, you can imagine how I started feeling. And then when they did an x-ray on my back, they found a node on my back. on the vertebrae, and that rocked our world, you know. But luckily they did another x-ray 6 months later, and it didn't change, so they said I just probably had that all of my life. And so through all of that, and still to this day, when I hear of people dying from cancer, my perspective change is I thank God for every day I'm still here. More than ever before. I thank God for today. I live for the moment more than I've ever lived for the moment. And we've got to live for today. It sounds so simple because we say it all the time, but we have to live for today. When I wake up every morning and I'm alive and I'm still here, I just thank God every day that I'm still here. You know?
I'm thankful too, Clint.
Yeah.
I remember first hearing about your cancer, and you're so dear to me, but I remember laying across my bed at home and weeping like a baby, saying, Lord, don't take my friend.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad you're here today too.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for that. And how did God carry you through that? How did God carry you? I know you had treatment, you know, the claustrophobia of all the stuff that you had to put on your face with where it was. I remember going through that. But how did you feel God in that time?
Yeah. I felt God through songs. I know it sounds crazy, but the doctor's appointment where I found out I had cancer, Kim didn't go to that doctor's appointment with me because I'd had my surgery, and they had told me that they had done a needle biopsy, and they said it's benign, you're not going to have any trouble, you know, everything's going to be okay, we're going to get that tumor out, and you're going to live on, go with life. And I'd lost the use of this side of my face. When I would smile, this side of my lip wouldn't come up, my eye wouldn't blink. When you don't even appreciate squinting until you can't squint.
Yeah.
Imagine walking outside in the sun and you can't squint.
Yeah.
You know? And so I'd completely lost this side of my face. They were hoping it would come back. And so I went to the doctor to see the progress of my face coming back. And so I told Kim, don't take off of work. Save your days. You've had to take off a lot. Go to work, and I'll just do this doctor visit. And so the doctor visit that I find out I have cancer, I'm all by myself. And it just rocked my world. But I went out to the car, and I turned on my car, and KSBJ was playing, and they sang the song by John Wilder, While I Am Waiting. I will worship while I'm waiting. I will trust while I'm waiting. I will be obedient while I'm waiting. And I wanted to turn the car off because I told, that's not what I want to hear right now, God. You know, I don't want to wait. I want you to take care of this. You know, because they said, we're going to refer you to MD Anderson. That's not what you want to hear. You know, I'll get in a little more later, but we had just moved, and that's part of, I'll share later, but I just moved. I started a new career. I was selling insurance with Liberty Mutual Insurance. I was a year into that. We were just getting that rolling, and I find out I have cancer, and I've got a family to support in a brand new way that I've never supported them. But that song's always been so valuable to me, you know, while I'm waiting, I'll worship. And so I truly had to do that. And so I sat there in the car, and I just started worshiping God. And I felt God's presence coming to my car. And I just knew that everything was going to be okay. I didn't know how, but I just knew everything was going to be okay. Then when I go and I'm starting my radiation treatments, and that's the freaky part is some of y'all may know about this, but they mold this mask to your face, and they snap your head down to this table, it's a flat table, and they snap your head down so it stays in the same place every day when they do radiation. And I'm not good at being locked down. Most people aren't, but I'm really not good at being locked down. And so when they went to fit me for that mask, it took about 3 times as long as normal because I was freaking out. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. You know, they put this big mouth guard in my mouth to protect my tongue, and I couldn't talk because of this mouth guard that they had molded to me. And and two, it saved the taste buds on my tongue, and now I'm really good. Glad that, because I like to eat. But all of that. But the first day that I lay down on that table for them to snap me down, they said, what genre do you want to listen to while you're going through your treatments? And I said, I want Christian music. And the first song that came on was How Great Is Our God by Chris Tomlin. And so I'm laying there with my eyes closed. I felt like that I was getting executed or something. I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Snap me down. They snapped me down. And how great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And I never opened my eyes in 6 weeks of treatment in that mask. I have no idea what the view looked like from inside that mask, because I felt like I would pop the buttons loose if I looked. But I'll never forget that song. That song has such a great meaning for me now. When I sing it, it's a whole new meaning, because 10 years later, I'm still singing, how great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. My girls still have their daddy. Kim, most of the time, is thankful she still has her husband. Probably some days she's not.
Yeah.
But that's how God brought me through. That was two of the most important times. And then a friend is a gift from God. I remember the day that I was meeting the doctor to determine if I was going to do radiation or not, because you have to make that decision. They let you decide if you want to do that or not. And I come off the elevator at MD Anderson, and standing there is this guy named Nathan Keating that I had no idea was going to be there. And he said, I figured I would be here today to help you make that decision. And I'll never forget, you don't look like an angel very many times in your life, but you look like an angel that day. I walk off, and I've got a picture of that. I snapped a picture of you standing there, and it was just like, hey, I got somebody here to make that decision with me. Then I went 10 years, no problems, no complications. Few little problems in my shoulder, little problems in my neck, cramps and stuff going on, but that's very doable. But last year, I went to bed hearing. I woke up at 2 a.m. and I couldn't hear out of my right ear, complete hearing loss. And my ear had clogged up before, because after the radiation, the wax doesn't work like it's supposed to. And so I thought, I got to get to the doctor and let them get the wax out. I go to the doctor. The next day, they get the wax out. My hearing doesn't come back. And that was a tough day. And still, to this point, I can't hear out of my right ear. The only benefit is when Kim's on this side. It really works.
You better be
good.
glad she's not here tonight, brother.
Yeah, I can truly say, I didn't hear you, love. I didn't hear you. So anytime that she starts getting a little cranky, I just turn that ear to her. Talk in the ear.
Yeah, that's funny.
But so that's been a new challenge for me. Is I can't hear out of my right ear. I went back to MD Anderson. They thought maybe I had a little tumor on my hearing, eardrum and stuff. I went through all of that again. I was actually hoping for the first time in my life, I was hoping I did have a tumor, because if there would have been a tumor, they said that happens a lot, they could have removed the tumor and my hearing would have come back. But the head, neck, and throat doctor at MD Anderson said, we don't know why you lost your hearing. That's encouraging.
Yeah.
He said, there's nothing we can do for you.
Yeah.
And so it's just a new challenge.
Man, I'm glad people are hearing this, though, because I think sometimes people see people like you on this platform preaching and go, man, they don't have any trouble, they don't have any struggle. But, your gift of humor has been laced all the way through all of your struggle, and your worship to God has been laced all the way through it. And I think that's so huge, because we win our battles. That song, that's how we fight our battles. but worship is imperative, and it's such a big deal. All of your ministry, you have been bivocational, the high majority of it.
Yes.
He has worked a job outside of the church and done church too, because most of your pastoring was in smaller churches and such.
Yeah.
And so due to that, you've had different businesses, you've served in different businesses, you've had your own business. But one thing that has been all the way through all of that is you could connect. I call you the master connector, because the guy can, go into a conference, he can go into a business meeting, you can go into a place where you get leads for your insurance, whatever it is, and you're going to come out of there, everybody's going to have 5 leads, you're going to have 35 leads. And you just have that ability to attract that kind of stuff. And so my question is, so many people here looking for friendships or business or whatever it may be, what is your secret sauce in that? How does one person get 5 leads and you get 35 leads? What's going on there?
Yeah. I take advantage of situations like this. If you need insurance, I can talk to you after church.
I got you. That was good.
Yeah.
That was good. I like it.
That's free. And I ask. And if you're a salesperson, know that, but it's ask. I remember when I took a break from pastoring. That's what got me into insurance. I decided I wanted to take a break for pastoring, and I went into insurance with Liberty Mutual Insurance in the Woodlands for 5.5 years. And the first networking event that I went to, I told my new boss, I said, hey, I'm going to go to this networking event. I'm going to get a lot of business cards. And she said, yeah. I said, people's been going to that event, and they get 3 or 4 contacts out of that. So just go to it, and see how you do it to get you started, get you working into the system. And I came back with 45 contacts from that event.
Yeah.
Blew her mind.
Yeah.
She's like, that's evidently a gifting you have, and I'm glad I hired you.
Yeah.
And so, and it wasn't that I was special, I just asked. I watched other Liberty Mutual agents there, and they just kind of stood over in the corner where I'm like, dude, I've got to make it happen tonight. These are all potential people, and I've got to make it happen. And so, part of it was survival too, because I'm like, I just left pastoring and doing in that, and I'm doing this full time, and I don't even know if I can really do this full time. But I bought a house in the Woodlands, and I moved my family here, and I have to do it if we're going to pay our bills. But one neat story that I kind of want to share about this is never minimize the small things in your life. So it was weird. This was way before Grace Liberty, but I had a client call from Liberty, an older gentleman, and he wanted to meet with me in person to quote his auto and homeowners insurance. And he wanted me to drive in person. I'm like, because my closing ratio was like 20%. So I wanted to quote you over the phone before I drove to your house. Mm-hmm. But he was determined that he wanted me to be at his house to quote. So I'm like, okay, I'll drive. So I drove there, and where I turned into his house was across the place from this credit union called Liberty Teachers Federal Credit Union. And I'd heard how Liberty Mutual had this partnership with credit unions that if you go in there and you set up, and if somebody's a member of a credit union, they can get a discount with the auto and home. And I'm like, I bet nobody's working that credit union, and I'm going to go in there. So I just walked in there. Nobody knew me. They thought I was a bank robber probably. I walked in. I'm like, where's your boss? And I shared this with her. I said, hey, I'm with Liberty Mutual. I just happened to be here. That guy didn't buy insurance, by the way. And but I went in, I said, hey, we got this program. Does anybody work with y'all here? She said, no. I said, I want to work with you. I want to be your contact with Liberty Mutual. She's like, hey, sounds good. And Liberty Mutual, that credit union had one location with about 2,000 members. So I started working that location real hard. People got where they didn't want to deposit their money anymore as I was there, because I'm like hustling them. And, but I worked this one. And finally, they were going to have an event one night where they honor all of their credit union members. And I almost didn't stay because they said there's only going to be about 300 or 400 people there that night. And then at closer time, they said, looks like we're only going to have 150 people. And I almost didn't stay because, it was a smaller credit union, and I'd worked all day, and I just wanted to get home. And I'm like, there's nothing going to happen. They're just there for the food. And they told me I could make a 5-minute presentation. But I finally decided to stay, and I gave my 5-minute presentation. And after I did that 5-minute presentation, afterwards, this guy come up to me afterwards, and he said, I've heard about you, and I've heard what all you're doing at this credit union with Liberty Mutual Insurance, and I want to do whatever it takes to get you to our credit union. I'm like, okay, this could turn out good. I said, what credit union are you with? He said, Houston Federal Credit Union. He said, we have like hundreds of thousands of members, and we have 9 locations. And I started tuning in. I was really glad I stayed. And I said, okay, so you work there. I said, who do I contact? Can you give me a contact person this is out in Liberty, Texas, on a Tuesday night. And I said, who do I contact? He said, me. He said, I'm the CEO and the president of Houston Federal Credit Union. And he said, here's my card. Call me tomorrow, and I want to meet up with you. I tried to get other people to partner with me at Liberty Teachers Federal Credit Union, but nobody would. When I started this partnership, because I worked at the Liberty County Teachers Federal Credit Union, my manager and area manager said, when you get that meeting with the board, we're going with you. Everybody started trying to work there, and ended up that I was the Liberty Mutual representative for 9 Houston Federal Credit Unions, and I was meeting with the board of Houston Federal Credit Union. All the board members were in there, and I'm getting to share my presentation of Liberty Mutual, all because I valued the day of small things. And it just kind of blew up on me.
I love that, the value of small things. That's a lot of wisdom right there. And another thing I heard in that is how you get those connections is by staying hungry. And I think that's so big. I think that is success in churches and businesses, being hungry. And I don't mean literally starving to death. I'm talking about passion, staying hungry. I'm going for it. I'm not just going to take it. I'm going for it. I'm not going to stand in the corner. I'm going for it. And that can be in soul winning, anything.
Yes.
And so just staying hungry. I love that. So,
yeah.
hey.
I call it Walmart evangelism. Maybe you need to go to Walmart. You'll meet more IRAs at Walmart.
Hey, that's the truth. That's the truth.
But at Liberty, Walmart's real close to the church. And so far I haven't been kicked out, but I walk into Walmart there, and I walk in with invite cards. And especially if I see a husband and wife with kids, they're mine. I'm going to go up, start looking at the chips next to them, acting like I'm buying chips.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say, hey, I see you have kids. Do you go to church anywhere? No. And so I started inviting them. So that same boldness that I've used with Liberty Mutual, I do it with Grace Church in Walmart.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I love that. You've had to shut some doors in your life also.
Yes.
Not just try to open them, but and move on a few times. And what have you learned about necessary endings? I've heard you use that term before. And what have you learned about necessary endings? Things that needed to close. My brother preached a message this past week about closing some things and moving into some things. But what have you learned about that?
Yeah, one of the days that I did that the most is when I resigned from the church in Sherman, where I was pastoring a Christian Life church, and I'd taken that church when it was down to, I think there was 12 people there when I took that. The church had split. Kim and I, it was the second church that we moved into the back of the church in to start. We did that in Hope, and we did that in Sherman. And I don't say that boastful. I'm just saying I thank God for Kim, because she moved into the back of 2 churches. When we were moving to Sherman, because we had bought a house, God had blessed our church in Hope, and we had finally got a house, our own house, and the Lord was blessing us. And then I'm like, hey, I feel like God wants us to go to Sherman. And she's like, where are we gonna live? I'm like, they have some empty Sunday school rooms, so that's gonna be your closet. She got real happy about that. But, so we went there, Sherman, we started, and we built that church up, got it up to almost 100 a couple times, because it would get there and then it would drop back down, you know. And, but it was growing, and then we'd had some people leave us, because that's part of, I had some beliefs that shifted, and some people, and I don't blame them for leaving, but in a 12-month period, we had 11 families leave us. Mm-hmm. And it was tough on Kim and I. Mm-hmm. And so during that time, we decided that I was going to resign from there, and we were going to even take a break from the ministry. And the last 2 years we were there, we had gotten a lot of new families that kind of had more of our vision and what we wanted to see in the future. And so they were really frustrated with us because they weren't there the first 7 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had some I've had crazy stuff in my ministry. I walked in on a mentally unstable man molesting a young boy in the men's restroom of the church. Mm-hmm. Walked in on that, had to turn all that in, had to deal with that. I was at a church there in Sherman, and the former pastor that was divorced from a lady came one Sunday to see his kids in a Christmas play, and it was the first time he had seen them active with their new dad. And after church, he started trying to pick a fight in the parking lot with the new dad, trying to pull him out of the car, and I had to threaten to call the cops. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of all the stuff. And Kim and I, we just finally hit the point where we're done. We can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I read a book by Henry Cloud called Necessary Endings. And it was a tough time in my life because I'd been pastor. I had dreams. I loved living in Sherman. We just remodeled the church. We'd just spent $135,000 on a complete remodel of the church. Mm-hmm. And yet we're saying we're going to leave. I told my girls that we were going to leave, and immediately they just broke down and started crying. They didn't want to lose their friends. They didn't want to move. And so my transition from there was really it was even tougher than I thought it was going to be. My father-in-law was there with us. He had helped us remodel the church. I told him we were going to move, and I was changing careers, and he's like, I think you ought to do one at a time, Clint. If I was you, I would do, you've only, I was bivocational, but the majority of my income was from church, and I hadn't really had to survive on just a different job. And he was right. It was tough,
But you had to shut some doors.
Yes. Yeah, I had to
to move on, you had to shut some doors. And at that time, what's very unique to me is that God was shutting that door for you. You moved to Houston. You're right down the street because 4 months later, you were diagnosed with cancer.
Yes.
So God was working in the whole process of those necessary endings, and He works with us in those ways.
Yeah.
What part of life is growing and learning from some of your mistakes, and we all have made them. But what are some mistakes that you made? Just quickly, we're getting late here, but some mistakes that you made in marriage that you learned from.
Yeah. My first mistake was being a traveling evangelist. My first year of marriage, living in and out of pastors' homes. Kim and I's marriage almost didn't survive that first year. We found out she was spoiled, I was spoiled. We were both used to getting our ways even more than we thought we would. Mm-hmm. And yet we were having to adjust to marriage, and she was having to adjust to be in the ministry, and then we were traveling and living in the extra bedroom of pastors' houses. Mm-hmm. And then probably the second part of that is I put a mobile home in the backyard of my parents. That's not good either. I would never recommend that. So we would go home, we would go to our home, but yet my parents, and I love my parents, but their house is like right there. And so we would finally come home to this where, my dad had horse and cows, and so he was wanting me to help him do all this. And so I've learned never move in the backyard, especially your first year of marriage.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It took a lot of humility in that
Yes.
time too.
Yes.
You know, humbling to one another.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I took her to her aunt's in Shreveport. She said she was ready to leave me. And so I loaded up her clothes. I said, that's fine. Let's go. Where do you want to go? She said, I want to go to my aunt's in Shreveport. And so we loaded up all her clothes, and I took her, and she was gone for 2 weeks. And I'm like, we're done, you know. And then we ended up meeting with a counselor, and that counselor helped us work through some things. Mm-hmm. And 30 years later, we're still together, but we made it through that first year.
I want people to hear that, because when you hit tough points, it's not worth quitting. You press on, because the rewards of that is
I know a
on
good
the other side
counselor,
of that.
by the way.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna skip through some, but what's some funny moments between me and you have had? Just,
So one is, it goes back to our first ride in your truck at TBC.
don't tell that one.
I get to TBC, you know, we're preachers now.
18 years
18 years old, and I get in there, and Nathan's got his radio on the rock station, and he realizes we got to listen to Christian music now, so he's like turning it down to KSBJ.
I turned my car on, and it was on the local rock station, and you know, well, I thought, man, Clint here, he's here for school. We got to get spiritual quick. So as soon as I turned it on, it was blaring. I was fighting to find that KSBJ, man.
So we started singing Amazing Grace.
Yeah. Had to get spiritual quick.
So that was a funny moment. Then there was a camping trip
Oh,
that you and some other guys, some guys from this area, Troy Monso was with us, a guy named Mark Whitehead was with us, and we did this camping trip, and I stayed up all night preaching about a torch. They were trying to sleep, and I determined I was going to stay up all night, which that story is really too long to tell.
it is a long story, but it is a story that makes me angry still to this day.
Yeah.
Because all of us trying to sleep, and he determined all night he was going to preach about this torch. And he does it all night. We'd come out and throw the torch, and he'd go, then that started a whole new message. Somebody's trying to destroy the torch. And anyway, you had to be there.
And a funny moment too is I think one of the first times you preached here at Lumberton, when Brother Davis was still pastor here. I showed up to this youth service that they were having here, and it was a youth service with all these youth.
Not very many, probably 7 students.
Yeah, and he got up and preached a sermon, The Bleating of the Sheep That Should Have Been Dead.
So let me tell you all the
really
backstory
challenging to youth to serve God and to live for God. The bleating of the sheep.
The backstory on that
Then
is,
I go home.
I'm trying to tell the
I find
backstory.
a sermon book. Here's a sermon book of his daddy's, and it's The Bleating of the Sheep That Should Have Been Dead. I'm like, not only did he preach that, he stole it from that book.
I did. I had looked all week in the Bible and couldn't find one thing to preach. I was 18 years old. Couldn't find anything to preach. I just thought, man, there's nothing else in there. And so I was walking through my dad's library, and it said the 15th famous messages of all times. You know, and you pull it out, and it's like Leonard Ravenhill and Martin Luther and all these guys. And boy, when I saw that, I thought, boy, that is powerful. Yeah. The bleating of the sheep that should have been dead. To these poor little students that are looking at me. And of all nights, this dude comes walking in and sits down. And when I give that title, I thought, I have messed up.
Yeah.
And I have never lived that down. But I will tell you this, it was so good that years later they voted me back in as to be the pastor of this church.
It wasn't that sermon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, what's the greatest
When we were traveling, I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and you were up on your elbows, and you were praying to somebody, in the name of Jesus, be healed right now, right in the middle of your sleep. I said, Nathan, what are you doing? You just rolled over and went to sleep. And you were so dynamic that you were praying for people.
Let me tell you one of the funniest stories about Clint, we were in Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, and we checked, we were staying at these people's house, this pastor, and man, we walked in there and said, we was kind of blown away, man. This house was, we thought, man, everything was just perfect in this house, 2-story. We were like, oh, man. And so they said, this is, where y'all staying up here. So we went up there and got in the bedroom while Alec, I said Alec, I'm sorry. Clint sees a treadmill in the room. And Clint's not the most athletic guy in the world. And he goes over to the treadmill.
Thanks for that compliment.
Yeah, I want to share it. And he goes over to this treadmill, and he hits the on button. He hits the on button. And here we're really nervous about staying in this house. He hits the on button, and it is on high. And it chunks him off the back of the treadmill, and he puts his foot through the wall. Yeah. So he comes to me and he said, Nathan, and he said, bro, I got to tell you what happened. And so he told me what happened. He says, what do we do? I mean, we're kids, He said, what do we do? We can put something in front of it and hide it, and they'll never know it until later, and they won't know who did it. So we finally, after much consulting with one another, figured out we better tell them about it, and we did, and they were fine, and I guess fixed the wall.
They moved a dresser. I saw that pastor like 5 years later. He said that hole was still there. They just put a dresser in front of it.
We were so nervous about that. All right, close this out. Greatest word of advice you have received, and pass it on to us.
So these probably aren't profound, but I think the greatest advice is the ones that stick with you the longest. And there's 3. My dad, when I first started preaching, I would get up and preach, and I would say, I've got a word from God for you tonight before I preach. For some reason, that just felt good. I would say, I've got a word from God. And then I would preach, and it was obvious that wasn't from God. And so my dad finally told me, he said, son, study, pray, and preach it. If it's from God, everybody will know it. If it's not from God, everybody will know it.
Yeah.
Quit saying that. Just preach after prayer and study. And since then, I don't think I've ever said again, I've got a word from God for you.
Yeah.
And I've had people come to me, thankfully, and said that word was for me, but I didn't have to tell them. God told them.
Yeah. If you have to tell them, it's probably not, huh?
Yes, that's right. Your dad was one of mine that I never forgot. I was getting ready to get married, and I loved their marriage that your parents had. And I asked Brother Keating, was at their Bible college, and I said, hey, give me some of your best marriage advice. What would you tell me? What's the best advice you can tell me about marriage? And he said, oh, that's simple. And I'm like, oh, it kind of caught me off guard. I was ready for him to get all deep on me. He said, that's simple. He said, to have a good marriage, you have to work at it every day. I said, that's it? He said, yeah. Remember that. And 30 years later, I'm still working at it every day. And how true that was is to have a good marriage, you got to work at it every day. If you do it once a year, you're not going to have a good marriage. And Kim and I have a great marriage now, but we work at it.
I love it.
And I use that in every marriage ceremony that I do now. I've probably never done a marriage without quoting your dad and saying, this is the best advice I can give you. It's the best advice I ever received. You got to work at it every day of your life if you're going to have a good marriage. And then the last thing is Pastor Ron Lyles. That's where I was at when I met Kim. And one day I was talking to him, and we were talking about somebody that had done something. And I'm like, boy, didn't learn anything from them. And he said, no, Clint, let me give you some great advice. He said, you can learn something from everybody. Some things you want to do and some things you don't want to do. And that's back when I was single. So it's been over 30 years, and I've never forgot that. And I put that in place so many times that I don't turn anybody off. I don't discount anybody. Even if I don't agree with what they're doing or saying, I can learn something from them. It may be something I want to do, maybe something I don't want to do, but I can learn something from everybody.
Hey, man, thanks for sharing your heart tonight.
Yeah.
Do y'all love this guy?
Yeah. Thank you for the invite.
Love him.